We're living in an era that future historians might one day call the age of superlatives. An age in which, from our political leaders to our fake news performance artists, even all the way down to our friends and coworkers, most everyone seems congenitally incapable of talking about things without resorting to all manner of overblown hyperbole and wild overstatement. So everything has got to be the biggest or the worst or the most unprecedented, events that are pretty mundane in actual reality, like, say, some idiot protesters drinking beer in the Capitol building and farting on Nancy Pelosi's desk, get blown up into events of earth-shaking importance. Oh, this is an insurrection, an armed assault against the citadel of our democracy. Why, it's the worst thing that ever happened since 9/11 and Pearl Harbor and a bastard love child named Gettysburg. And if you don't believe me, just ask AOC about what a harrowing day that was. You've never been almost raped from across the street and down the block, so don't you go trying to diminish her trauma and her lived experience, you monsters, until you've walked a mile in her shoes. Then you might understand the heavy burden of living in a world where every single man desperately wants to bone you. I just hope she makes it out with her modesty intact, really. Or, moving on to a similarly innocuous thing, we've seen voter ID laws decried as being so racist that they're basically the same as segregation and lynching. It's Jim Crow 2.0. It's Democrat Sheriff Bull Connor and his dogs and fire hoses all over again. It's the return of the horrors of Democrat Governor George Wallace. It's a concerted assault on the civil rights of black people. When you don't have ballot drop boxes on every random street corner and 67 days of no questions asked early voting? Because damn it, if that's not anti-black racism, then you tell me what the hell is, you crack-ass Peckerwood. So, right on cue, in the 1 week now since Russia invaded Ukraine, we've heard lots of silly pronouncements along the lines of, "This is the worst war in Europe since 1945, oh my god," and nope! Might want to just pump the brakes there, little news girl lady. I mean, far be it for me to question your credentials as a military historian and strategic mastermind, or your ample bust, or your impeccably unblemished complexion, but we've got what, according to the worst estimates, something on the order of 5,000 or 6,000 men have been killed in action so far, which, don't get me wrong, it's the sort of bloodletting we're not really accustomed to seeing very often here in this century. But if you're going to casually remark, just out of a desire to deal in superlatives, that this is the worst armed conflagration on European soil since the end of the Second World War, now I think if I was a Bosnian or a Serb or a Slovene or a Croat or a Macedonian or a Kosovar or a Montenegrin, I might be jumping up and down asking you to hold my beer right now. In point of fact, there are only 2 wars in world history where a new word or phrase had to be invented to describe the mode and scope of the industrialized killing that took place against civilian populations, and one of them was the Yugoslav War of 1991 to 2001, which of course was the war that introduced the world to the term ethnic cleansing, which actually originated not as a pejorative or a condemnation, but as a boast, by Slobodan Milosevic, former Serbian president and noted war criminal. Ethnic cleansing was the thing he was promising to do to the Bosnian Serbs. We're going to round those people up, confiscate all their property. Some of them will starve and work to death. Some will just toss out of the country, and some will just liquidate. The casualty estimates for that war in terms of combined civilian and military deaths is something on the order of 140 to 150,000, with a further 4+ million people displaced, and the armed interventions by NATO and the UN peacekeepers in their pretty baby blue helmets didn't wind up doing a whole hell of a lot to ameliorate the severity of the situation. So you will have to kindly pardon me, my dear newsgirl lady, if I should happen to facepalm in bewilderment when you casually remark that Russia versus Ukraine 2022 is the most horrifying European war of the last 75 years, because it just ain't, and it's not particularly close. So can you just stop saying dumb shit? Is it so very much to ask? And if we're being thorough here, the Hungarians might also have cause for asking newsgirl lady to hold their beer, because they lost around 5,000 people killed during the Soviet invasion of 1956, which, if you're looking for a precursor to what we're seeing now in Ukraine, that's probably it. See, the Hungarians got the idea that they were going to throw out their Stalinist president, who was a stooge from Moscow, and they were going to replace him with a nationalist president who ran for office on a promise to withdraw from the Warsaw Pact and to stop being a Soviet satellite state. And that is exactly what they did. They elected the new guy, and he duly fulfilled his campaign promise by withdrawing Hungary from the Warsaw Pact. And then Uncle Joe Stalin said, "Oh, that's cute. That's precious. That is freaking adorable that you guys think you actually have the option of installing an anti-Soviet government and extricating yourselves from the Soviet sphere of influence. But let me clue you guys in on how this all actually works. We own you. You belong to us. What part of Iron Curtain do you clowns not understand? Now, just to make sure you don't ever get any ideas like this again, we're going to be rolling into Budapest with the full might and fury of the Red Army, and I told our boys to make sure they're in a killing mood when they get there, because I want to make extra sure that my message gets across. And that is how hard power works. We've grown accustomed in recent decades to only ever seeing the exercise of soft power and soft imperialism, but this is just the same thing by less subtle means. What our country does with a friendly smile and a rainbow flag and some renewable energy subsidies, Vladimir Putin does the old-fashioned way, with an iron fist and guns and bombs and tanks and artillery. But the real objective is always the same. It's to bring other countries into your orbit, to exploit them at your leisure and take whatever you have, whatever they have that you want, and to make sure they know damn well who is in charge. The way we do these things is, well, sure, little European country, you can join NATO. We'll place you under our protection militarily, but this means you agree to fly the rainbow flag on all of the appointed days, and you agree to pass a same-sex marriage law, and you agree to trans the kids, and you agree to wreck your entire economy with the white elephant boondoggle of renewable energy. So as long as we're all in agreement, welcome to the club. Isn't freedom great? From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where I went to the library the other day and I asked the librarian, "Do you have that new book about living with a small penis?" And she said, "No, I don't think it's in yet." And I said, "Yep, that's the one." Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. Happy Friday. I am your eponymous host and humble servant, and you may have noticed a strange thing when and if you tuned in for President Joe Biden's State of the Mumbling Semi-Cadaver speech on Tuesday night. And judging by the TV ratings, I'm guessing you probably didn't. For my part, the first thing I thought when they started showing interior shots of the House chamber was, wow, that is a hell of a lot of royal blue and gold that everybody's wearing. I didn't know the Los Angeles Rams had so many fans among our senators and congressmen in the nation's capital, but I guess they did just win the Super Bowl, so maybe they're just all a bunch of bandwagon fans. And then it hits me. Wait a minute. Those aren't Los Angeles Rams colors. Even though they literally are the exact same two colors, those are Ukraine colors. Nearly every single person in our congressional delegation, in a show of unity that cuts boldly across partisan lines, they've all replaced their U.S. flag lapel pins with Ukraine flag lapel pins. Some of the idiots are even shaking blue and gold pom-poms. Some female members have gone a step further and garbed themselves in a head-to-toe Ukraine blue and gold ensemble. You see, when you're a card-carrying, dues-paying member in good standing of the radical identitarian left, rule number one of moral virtue is always to outwardly display some talisman of your own unwavering moral goodness. And now that mask mandates are going by the wayside, they need a new talisman of virtue. And there it is, right on cue. It's the Ukrainian flag. For when you wear the Ukrainian flag, either as a pin on your lapel or as a cape or as a fun mini-skirt, it makes the bold, brave, controversial statement that yes, I think big countries invading little countries is bad. Really, really bad. And I don't care who knows it. I'm willing to go out on a limb for my beliefs, to risk it all in order to state my firm conviction that dropping bombs on random apartment buildings is totally not cool at all. You see, if I didn't wear my Ukraine flag pin, if I didn't have my Ukraine pom-poms, if I wasn't wearing the Ukraine thong underwear I just bought on Amazon Prime, Well, that would be the same as saying I love Putin and I support his invasion and I think Russia is the greatest thing since sliced gluten-free pita bread. And what the hell kind of message is that to send? And make no mistake, ladies and gentlemen, as enjoyable as it is to mock these stupid people for their nauseatingly ostentatious displays of retail moral puffery, that's not so very far off from how they actually think about the world. There are legions of people all around us who believe genuinely and fervently that if you wear your little Ukraine pin and do your little Ukraine profile pic and retweet all of the right Ukraine hashtags, or whatever it is that people do on Twitter, then not only can you be secure in the knowledge that everyone on your social media feed knows that you hate bad things, but also in the knowledge that these cloying displays of contrived moral righteousness actually contribute to the world becoming a better place. The Ukrainian people might not be able to defeat Russia by themselves, damn it, but as long as they've got our profile pics and hashtags and lapel pins, we know they've got a fighting chance. And since we are on the topic of virtue signaling morons who enjoy saying impossibly retarded things in public, Adam Kinzinger, come on down. You're the next contestant, and don't worry, we've got a full box of tissues for you down here if you should need to blubber and weep at any point during these proceedings. Now look, I know a lot of people in the general public fell for this Ghost of Kiev hoax where some Ukrainian fighter pilot had supposedly shot down 5 or 6 Russian aircraft, but most people in the general public are not lieutenant colonels in the Illinois Air National Guard. Adam Kinzinger is a lieutenant colonel in the Illinois Air National Guard, and he fell hook, line, and sinker for a fake story about an ace fighter pilot in the year 2022. I am also not a lieutenant colonel in the Illinois Air National Guard, but I do know that air-to-air combat hasn't really been a thing since about 50 years ago. In fact, the last recorded kill in an air-to-air engagement in world history was during the Yom Kippur War of 1973. The United States, we only had 5 ace fighter pilots in the Vietnam War. By the end of that war, traditional air-to-air combat had largely become a historical artifact because all of the world's fighter aircraft now had radar capabilities and munitions whereby if you were trying to shoot down another fighter, you're going to be taking the shot when he's still way the hell out of visual range. In the 21st century, fighters engaging other fighters is completely unheard of. Fighters are used now for ground attack and close air support, and that is pretty much it. There sure as shit is not any Ukrainian hero fighter pilot up there in a white scarf dogfighting with the Russians like he's goddamn Pappy Boyington in Black Sheep Squadron. But as Adam Kinzinger, lieutenant colonel in the Illinois Air National Guard, apparently he needs this all explained to him. He was all too happy to take this story at 100% face value and to make a complete, utter ass of himself with a series of fawning, and since deleted, tweets about what a total badass this fictional fighter pilot is. Now, I don't know how difficult it is to be advanced to the rank of lieutenant colonel in the Illinois Air National Guard, but if a guy this dumb can manage it, I feel like as achievements go, it's roughly on the level of finding your rank insignia in a freaking Cracker Jack box. I feel like I had to demonstrate a better grasp of aviation history to achieve the rank of Cadet Master Sergeant in the Civil Air Patrol than Adam Kinzinger did to become a lieutenant colonel in the semi-actual military. But the things that really matter, he always gets those things right. So on Tuesday, he looked like one of the biggest LA Ram fans in the whole building with his Ukraine flag pin and his matching Ukraine tie and pocket square. It was just about the Ukrainiest thing you ever saw. But did you happen to notice just how overboard these people all went with the Ukraine cheerleading, and that it happened at the exact moment when the capital mask mandate was finally dropped? Now, the masks were never about public health. We've known that all along. It was never difficult to figure out. For the maniacally pro-masking crowd, the quivering hypochondriac religious zealots whom we allow to dictate the manner in which we normal people are allowed to live our own lives, the masks were doubly beneficial, both as a public talisman of one's own moral virtue and also as a cudgel, an obedience muzzle by which we can demonstrate our ownership and authority over our political opponents. You may have heard the story today about there was a protest at some university. I forget which university it was, but does it matter at this point? That they had a protest demanding that the school reimpose its own mask mandate now that the state mask mandate has been lifted. But this is such a very telling thing, for I'm sure it has not escaped your notice that the people who are the most maniacally hypochondriacal about wearing their stupid masks, they will not brook any consideration for personal choice or freedom. Some of them will react violently at the mere mention of the word freedom, even though, let's just call things what they are. If the masks work, if they do anything, then the people who choose to wear them, they have no reason to care if anybody else wears them. But fat chance of that happening. The people who wear the face diaper simply cannot tolerate living in a world where the wearing of said face diaper is a matter of personal preference. The militant mask wearer, he demands that everyone else in the society be forced, under pain of criminal prosecution, to be just as much of a silly, whimpering neurotic as he is. So until the day when I wake up and no longer feel like every barefaced person I encounter is a mortal threat to my health and well-being, I demand that everyone be forced to wear the face diaper, because I am entitled to only ever feel the feelings that I wish to feel. And it's up to everyone else in the country, up to and including the government, to make sure that happens. And to provide me with a safe space and 48 weeks of paid medical leave if it doesn't. For upwards of 2 years now, the mask has been the primary religious devotional object for members of the woke leftist identitarian cult. And many of them are flipping out now at the prospect of living in a world where people are individuals and not a bunch of faceless zombies. And they've latched on to everything Ukrainian now because they have lost their pacifier, they've lost their security blanket, and they desperately need something with which to replace it. Wearing the mask used to be an easy way of signifying that you have all the correct political opinions. And the saint-like veneration of Dr. Anthony Fauci, that served a similar purpose. He provided another convenient rallying point whereby the good people could differentiate themselves from the bad people. But do the obsessive mask wearers actually care about anyone else catching the China virus or succumbing to it? Of course they don't. Quite the opposite, in fact. We've seen them react sometimes with gleeful delight when people with the wrong political views, Herman Cain being an obvious example that comes to mind, die from the Kung flu. And do the obsessive Ukraine flag wearers actually care what happens to the Ukrainians? Of course they don't. The Ukraine flag is just what we do now that they have taken away our precious mask mandates. So if you see someone not wearing a Ukraine flag, it's just like seeing someone who's not wearing a mask. You know that is a bad person who thinks the wrong things. You know that's a person to stay away from and never interact with. And while it may be rather spectacularly incorrect to declare Russia versus Ukraine as the worst European conflict since the Second World War, that isn't to say there are no commonalities, because there are some. And when Germany invaded Poland in 1939, it came as a shock to most observers, just like this invasion did. The area being invaded was formerly part of the invader's territory, then as now. The land we know as Poland, historically, it had often been a part of Germany, both during the Holy Roman Empire and later during the Imperial German period between 1870 and the end of the First World War. In fact, a lot of the top German generals in the Second War, particularly the Prussian aristocrats, they had been born and raised in the area that became Poland in 1919, and which they were then invading in 1939 as Germans. And Russia and Ukraine have a similarly intertwined history. They've often been part of the same polity. Historically, there are lots of ethnic Russians in Ukraine and lots of ethnic Ukrainians in Russia. We like to reduce these things down to black and white matters, but they never are. They really are quite complicated. Unless you're Kamala Harris. If you're Kamala Harris, you don't need to burden yourself with pretending to understand really anything about geopolitics. You can just go on some dumb podcast and give an explanation that sounds like you're explaining photosynthesis to a room of learning impaired 5-year-olds. Well, Russia is a country in a place called Europe. Russia is a big country. Ukraine is a little country. Russia invaded Ukraine, and that's bad. And yeah, that's literally about what she actually said. And I guess when you got your start in politics as the concubine of a man named Willie, there is no place to go except up, but still, she's had 14 months in which to acclimate herself to the incredibly easy, non-challenging job she has. And in spite of herself, she seems somehow to keep getting worse at it. And I'm frankly am at a loss to understand how that happens, but in any event, we will leave things there and close it out for this week. Thank you very much for watching. Here's wishing everyone a delightful, edifying weekend. I will see you Monday. Until next time, do not comply. Get off my lawn.